to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Always a treat to have Rabbi Dov Lipman, former member of Knesset, originally from the United States. And now he's helping people go to Israel because it's not so easy getting. You think a country that's begging for people to make Aliyah, to come visit, it's not so easy. Rabbi Lipman, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Zev. Thank you.
My pleasure. And just for our audience, we go back a long time. My son had you as a counselor in a sports camp many, many years ago. And nice to see that you're still engaged in a different kind of sport.
I miss those days very much.
You miss being an elected official in the Knesset too?
No, I don't miss that at all. But I very, very much miss just spending my summer playing ball, teaching Torah with wonderful young men. That's for sure.
Right. He enjoyed it, and the kids at that time really enjoyed the experience. Now, Israel has been extremely cautious with Corona, not letting people in. They announced a few times, we're going to let you in if you're vaccinated, if you're part of a group. November 1st was supposed to be a new opening. Has things really changed since the beginning of November?
The truth is, I have to tell you, November 1st, which was this announcement of this big opening, we have not seen as much chaos, confusion, anxiety, and stress in the entire year and a half of the Corona travel like we've seen over the last week and a half since November 1st. I established Yad L'Olim 4 months ago after dealing with this for over a year. And we have a team that's working and trying to help people and guide them. And there's a lot of confusion out there. There are forms that aren't working. And there's been more than one night where I had to be awake late into the night and early into the morning because there were people stuck in airports not being allowed onto flights. And then we had to kick in and help them get onto their flights. So it's been a very challenging time, that's for sure. I think we're making some progress, both on a technical side and on a government side, but we still have a lot more work to do.
So I'll tell our audience that Yad L'Olim helps those that want to go to Israel, go navigate. Israel always been a country of red tape. And I think with Corona, the red tape is even bigger and broader, unfortunately. And I know people, by the way, you've been very helpful in getting them into Israel. So thank you for that. I know it's not easy. So how are you able to navigate the Israeli red tape and help people? What do you do?
So there's a few things that we've been focusing on. The first thing is, thank God, because I was blessed to serve in the Knesset and I have connections in various ministries, working with those connections to get clear information. That's the first thing. There is so much misinformation out there, and people are reading this website or that website and hearing this rumor or that rumor, and that's leading people to really be hurt. And I mean that when I say hurt, I'm using that word very deliberately, because when you take an 11-hour flight, come to Israel, land here, and you're turned back on the next flight because you didn't have the paperwork, you didn't have approval, that hurts, and it hurts a lot. We want to prevent that. We want to enable traveling to Israel to be as smooth as possible. So the first step is getting the information out. We have the information is sent out via Facebook. There's a Facebook group called Reunite Olim with Families. We have our own database of people who have asked for updates, and we send it out. People can turn to my Facebook as well. And that's just for basic, clear information. That's number one. So by the way, if anybody is watching and they want to be added to any of those lists, they can just go to info@yadlaolim.org, say I want to be added to the update list, and we'll put you on that list with thousands of other people so you can get real-time information and clear information. That's step number one. Step number two is, with those connections that we have in the government relations, we try to have influence on the policies. And thank God, I can look back over the last year and a half, and while the policies have not been exactly what we've asked for, we have had tremendous influence on the policies, and we're still doing that as we speak now. We're not happy with the November 1st guidelines, and I'll explain why in a moment, and we're working with the government officials to try to change them. And then number three, when people are stuck, there are a variety of places that we can turn to, whether it's the population authority or even at times reaching out to the airports themselves and using the gravitas of a former member of Knesset and also an established NGO that's helping people with this issue. And we're able to clarify for some of the airlines and the airports what the rules are to help people get onto the flights.
But let me ask you a question. Once they're there, shouldn't there be a facility where they can stay until things get sorted out as opposed to being put back on the next flight out?
So the policy at Ben Gurion is, if a person enters Israel without approval, the next flight that's available, they're sent on. Thank God, there are times when there's hours before the next flight, and during that time, I'm able to work the system again, assuming they're deserving to come in. Sadly, there are people who try to beat the system and try to sneak in. And in those cases, I agree with the authorities that there are rules that are in place and you have to abide by those rules. But a lot of the stress that people have, Zev, is in the actual forms themselves. It's very difficult. You sit in front of your computer, you don't know what to do. And our team, and I really want to credit them, it's Maureen, Ariella, and Gail, and Judith, and Deborah. They're helping people, literally holding their hand through the process of filling out the forms the right way so that they get the approvals that they deserve according to the rules. So you can see on many different levels how just on the Corona travel itself, I mean, Yad L'Olim has a full agenda of government relations issues for immigrants, for their families, for the global Jewry, which we're going to be working on. But just in Corona travel itself, we are certainly busy day and night just dealing with all the issues I just laid out for you.
So let me ask you, Rabbi Dov Lipman, let me ask you the $64,000 question. What are the rules? What officially do you have to do in order to visit or go to Israel?
Okay, so again, I'm speaking right now at the time that we're speaking, and that's important for me to emphasize because things are
tomorrow or today.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So things are always changing, and I always, people have referenced interviews of mine from 2 weeks ago, and they said, "But you said this," but I said, "Yeah, but that was 2 weeks ago," and things are always changing, which is why it's so important to get the updates. But right now, as we're speaking, the rule is that the only way you have a right to have entry into Israel is if one of two possibilities for all around the world. If you've gotten your second dose of a vaccine or a booster within the last 180 days. That is the criteria to get in. I should mention parenthetically that Johnson & Johnson, one dose is enough for that. That is the allowance to come into Israel right now. If you're recovered from Corona in the last 6 months, only in the European Union, and it does seem right now in the UK as well, you can get in based on a recovery from the last 6 months. But everywhere else in the world, that is not allowed. By the way, that is the issue that we're really tackling with the government, is we're trying to get it expanded to include recoveries from all around the world, maybe with a serological test, but to open it up to more people. Because basically, we've closed the door on so many people because of this policy that has been developed. Now, how do you do it? Whereas for many, many months, there was a link to the foreign ministry, to the consulates, or your relative in Israel, first degree relative to the Ministry of Interior in Israel, the Misfat Pnim. That is no longer the case. It is now a 24-hour before your flight entry form from the Ministry of Health. That is where you go into and get your clearance to travel into Israel. Assuming that you fit the criteria, you will actually get your green pass in an email back immediately. And that is your allowance to travel to Israel. But there are so many people who struggle with that form. There have been glitches technologically with that form. And those are the times when we ask you to reach out to us. And by the way, just so people can know, if you need to reach us, the best way for that kind of an issue is go to our website, yadleolim.org. You fill out a simple form on the homepage. You choose Corona Travel, and our team will be in touch with you. They're constantly monitoring that. So when you ask me who is allowed into Israel right now, especially mostly for your audience, which is outside of the European Union, the answer is only if you've been vaccinated within the last 6 months. And I'll add to that, you have to have 2 weeks after you've been vaccinated before you can get onto the flight. So not only getting the vaccination or getting the booster, but then you have to wait 2 weeks before you can get onto the flight. So it's quite a limited group at the moment. There is some kind of a process for tour groups through tour operators, which is different. I'm not involved in that. And it's also very, very gray and very confusing. But what I've told you right now is the basic rules. Now, there is an exception. There's an exception that has been made for parents who are traveling for a wedding of their child. So even if you don't fit the criteria, you're allowed to ask the consulate to travel in that case. We are fighting very hard to expand that exception to apply to siblings of a chatan and kala who are getting married, to the grandparents of people who are getting married. We're fighting to expand it to grandparents to come for the birth of grandchildren. And we're trying to get it extended to any immediate family of a lone soldier to come and give that lone soldier the support that they need. So we're working hard to try to expand it. But right now, the only exception that's in place is parents for a wedding of their child.
Now, I heard some crazy stories. You probably heard them too, where people say, "Oh, if I paid $1,000 or $2,000, you can get in," and they know people who did that. Any truth to that? Is there some of that there as well, where people were able to buy the way to get into the country to skirt the rules?
So I don't know about it directly, but I am hearing from people that there are apparently people who are doing so. I have no idea how. I don't know what the mechanism is. Our role in Yad L'Olim is, once the rules are announced, to help people within those rules, and certainly to try to influence the rules, but certainly not involved in any manner. And I just don't know from firsthand knowledge of what people are doing. But I will tell you, Zev, that definitely shows the desperation that people feel. With the doors of Israel closed, meaning the fact that people, assuming that they find some way to skirt the system, are paying that kind of money. Again, I feel it's terrible, it's corrupt. I don't know who's doing it and who's taking advantage of people, but it does show that people feel such desperation over their situation.
Rabbi Dov Lipman, former member of Knesset, is our guest. He has an organization called Yad L'Olim. While it's supposed to help people to immigrate to Israel, but because of Corona helping people who just want to get in to visit, it's not easy to get into Israel these days.
And I do want to emphasize, Zev, that helping people to emigrate to Israel is actually not in our mandate as much. You certainly in North America, there's Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is the official arm of the Israeli government for all things related to making Aliyah. We're trying to very much be a voice within the government once people are here. There's a variety of issues to try to help clear the way, and bureaucracy and certainly Corona travel is fitting into that.
In other words, once they're there, you want to make sure they stay there.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Has there been people, because of the restrictions that left, that said they wanted to leave the country, or?
So, I haven't heard of people saying that they want to leave because of it. I will tell you, there are many Olim that are suffering terribly without the support system of their families, especially younger people who have made the sacrifice to come here and go to university here, go to the army here, and start their lives here, and they don't have their family around them here. It has been a very difficult time. It's been a very difficult time for their families. And I've heard, people have said things in moments of great anger or sorrow, like, I guess Israel doesn't want me. I'll start going on vacation to Mexico, and statements like that. But I don't think that'll be long lasting. I do try to explain to people that, if I'm the leader of Israel, and ultimately whatever happens
here.
You're
running for prime minister?
I'm sorry, if I'm the prime minister.
Does that mean you're running for prime minister? You're getting back into politics?
Very much not. Very much not. There is no greater joy than being able to help people and make a difference, but not to be boxed in the political system. That's for sure. But those people, they have on their shoulders the health of their country. And Israel's a small country. Things can spread here very, very quickly. So I understand that they're constantly having to weigh, on the one hand, trying to open things up. And by the way, they also think about the tourism industry and people's parnasa, their livelihoods in Israel itself, but also the fear of variants coming in. So just as an example, I'll tell you, the number one complaint we're getting right now is you have closed the doors to our children, because children are not vaccinated and you're not accepting their recoveries in case they had corona. So you've basically said no children could come. Why is that fair? And while I am advocating for some changes on those rules, we have to remember the Delta variant that brought the most recent wave to Israel was brought in by an 11-year-old who was in a country and was unvaccinated and brought it here. So the Israeli leaders recognize that children, while thank God for the most part, they don't get very sick from corona, they can certainly be carrying it and bringing it to the country. And therefore, that's why these fears are in place, and that definitely impacts the decision making. But we're certainly trying to lobby for opening things up a little bit more than they are, and we'll update as time goes along whether or not we're successful or not.
Now, you said people have trouble with the form. It should be pretty cut and dry. So what kind of form, how complicated is it? You should just present your green card and say, here, I hear double vaccination. I have triple vaccination. Here it is. What more do you need?
You think it would be that easy, right? But
right. I know you go places in New York. You just upload you go to a wedding. You upload your card, and that's it.
Yeah, it's hard to understand, and I want to be clear. I love my country. I'll do anything for my country. It's hard to understand how the startup nation cannot get a form up and running for people to get the simple process. But there have been so many glitches and so many things wrong. Remember, we've shifted from the consulate link and the Interior Ministry link. Now it's the Ministry of Health link. And people are having all kinds of difficulties navigating it. The truth is, it would be too complicated just in the context of our interview to even walk you through it. But the basic thing that I'll tell people is when you go onto the entry form, the pre-flight entry form for the Ministry of Health, which is a 24-hour form, sit down, take a deep breath, don't panic, put your information in correctly. And what we advise you to do is don't try the option of uploading your documents right away, but there's an option to just manually type in your information, your vaccination information, and then it gives you some place to put the documentation as well. But the most important thing is just get that information in there. You'll show that you have the booster. You'll show that you have the double vaccination within 180 days. And then if you've done everything correctly, you'll immediately get your green pass in the mail, in the email, and that is your ability to get onto the flight. I do want to mention also, do not forget, you have to take a PCR test within 72 hours of your takeoff to Israel, meaning even if you have a few legs of your trip, it has to be within the leg of going to Israel. And then you also, in advance, have to order your PCR test for when you arrive in Israel. Because when you arrive in Israel, according to this new system, there's no other testing other than PCR test. And then you are officially in quarantine until you get the result of your negative PCR back, or 24 hours, whichever comes sooner. In the meantime, you can still take public transportation. You can go to your hotel and do your quarantine there. But that's basically
if you can go in public transportation and get to your hotel. So how you?
Yeah, they call it the minor quarantine. That's what it's called.
And what can happen? And what can happen to you if you don't end up being in quarantine until you get the results? Can you get into trouble during that time period? If you're not in the hotel?
I will say this. In theory, if you are stopped by police and you're out and about and you're supposed to be in quarantine, there is a 5,000 shekel fine. It's really not worth it for the one day. But I will tell people, check with your hotel, because there are many hotels that are saying, I'm very happy that the government is saying you can come here, but until you get your negative PCR, we don't want you coming here. So just check to see if your hotel will take you in. So you ask, what can go wrong? There are glitches in the system. People who deserve to get the green pass aren't getting it. People don't know where to look for it. And that's why we're here, yadlolim.org. Ask our team to help you, and we'll certainly guide you through the process.
Now, by the way, are they monitoring people? And I've heard stories where people went to Israel and they're supposed to be in quarantine for days, and all of a sudden they were caught because of their cell phone. They were tracked. Are they tracking those between coming in and getting your negative report on the PCR test?
So there's very little tracking in that 24 hours. The tracking is really done for people who have to be in quarantine for longer. So, for example, an unvaccinated Israeli is allowed to enter Israel at any time, but when they come back, they have to be in quarantine for 7 days. Those kinds of things, I think, are being tracked more. But I really would ask people to really try to keep to the rules. As much as I'm here as an advocate, I also want to protect the health of Israelis. And listen, people have arrived and they've had positive PCRs, and then you're in quarantine for 10 days and have to deal with that here. So I definitely ask people to try to keep to it. I will say one other thing also. They are spot checking people at Ben Gurion for their documentation. So in other words, let's say you somehow, God forbid, but if someone was trying to beat the system and they found a way through the Ministry of Health form to get their green pass, even though they don't deserve it, they are checking people at Ben Gurion and saying, show me your vaccination documentation. And if you don't have it, they will send you back. So everyone should just keep that in mind, because I've heard also about people saying there's all kinds of ways to beat the system. Remember, the system is in place to protect the health of the people of Israel. We are working on the government side to try to make changes to the rules so that more people can come in a healthy manner, but they will spot check people in the airport and be prepared for the possibility, if you don't have the right documentation, to be sent back, which is why we also tell people travel with your documents. Print it out, have it with
Can
you.
you show it to them in your cell phone? Do they accept cell phone?
You can, but it really is best. By the way, more importantly, for the airport side outside of Israel, where there are people who are saying, some of the gate agents and other people are saying, I want to see a printout. It's just worthwhile, if you can, to print everything out, have it that way, so you don't have to deal with any issues.
Now, I heard stories, speaking of bureaucracy, I've heard stories of people gotten a pass saying that you're okay to go to Israel, and then they get another email saying you can't go, that they took it back. So I know of a case of somebody who got the original email and they got the second one. They went anyway, and they got to Israel. They may believe they didn't know about the second one, and somehow they were able to get in, but they had a hard time. So there's a lot of glitches from what I hear.
For sure. That happened a lot more in the previous time, when you had to get approval from the consulate. So the consulate would say yes, and then the Interior Ministry would say no. And we did have lots of those issues. I've heard less of that during this time. I will say, if someone does come to Israel and they are stopped and they are pulled aside, first of all, follow what the authorities are asking you to do. Don't fight with them. Don't scream at them. No one's trying to cause you problems, but you can also reach out to us in that situation. And I'll say the last 2 nights, we've had people who were stopped and they were actually going to send them back. And we were able to show through the documentation that they did not deserve to be sent back. And via the health ministry and the population authority, we were able to get them to stay in Israel. And that's obviously a very great joy when someone was going to be unfairly sent back because of a mistake. So you can reach out to Yad L'Olim in that situation as well.
So let me ask you a theoretical question. You said if people are rejected, they're sent back on the next flight. Let's say someone comes in Thursday night late. So there's not enough time to reach the destination before Shabbat. So what do they do in such a case?
Yeah, so in that case, they're not going to, obviously people have the Shabbat issue. They'll figure out a solution in that case. We have had people who have to stay overnight in the airport. One of the things that we're working on is when people are being held, to make sure that their conditions are a little bit better than they are right now. And that's an issue that we've been struggling with.
How about a hotel at the airport?
Yeah, so they have to find solutions. The truth is, I have not heard yet of a case where the person wasn't allowed to go to a hotel and then come back after Shabbat to deal with it. So I think they're understanding in that situation.
What's the most common complaint that you hear from people?
The most common complaint is definitely the anxiety over the form. That's where people really need hand holding. And, I'm filling it out, I'm not getting it. And sometimes, by the way, it's as simple as we notice that they typed the wrong passport number. They wrote a 5 instead of a 6. People are just so anxiety filled. And then sometimes it's just as simple as that. Sometimes it's that they went the wrong route on the form. So that's why it is important. And again, we're available. We want to help people. yadlolim.org. Just fill out the form on the homepage, and we'll be there to help you through it.
Your form, they got to fill out a form too on your webpage. Form after form. What's going on here?
Yeah, form after form. They have to fill out the form. And one of the reasons for that is that just gives us, we need to know when we're helping them some basic information. Also, remember, we're also in a situation where we have to decide, there are people who literally have a flight in 30 minutes, and we need to be available to help them. People have a flight in 23 hours. We're going to get to you, but it's just going to be perhaps a little bit late, not immediate. I'll say it that way. But we are available to help people, and certainly in emergency situations, people have found ways to reach out to me as well, and I'm certainly willing to help if that comes to my attention.
So the question is there a hotline or emergency number? I know you said you prefer email, but sometimes people just need a number to call right away. Is there a hotline?
You know why we didn't post an emergency hotline on our webpage when we first opened up? You want to guess, Zev?
Because you're afraid people, when you email you, just keep calling you all day and night.
For everybody, it's an emergency. I don't say that cynically. Every person sees their situation as an emergency, and working the phones is just not the most conducive way. I can tell you my WhatsApp here. I'm sitting here with my phone now as we're talking. Since we started talking, the number of notifications is significant, and we will answer people. We will help you out, but it's best to use whether it's the website or the info@yadlolim.org, and we will get to people and help them out.
No, the reason why I mentioned that, because if you're stuck in the airport and you have 30 minutes to go, I would assume that people, instead of writing an email and waiting for a response, and I don't know how often the emails are checked, People may say, let me call a number. I need help. I have 30 minutes before they throw me out of the country.
Let me say it this way. People have my phone number, and it's totally fine. In that situation, it's totally fine to use it, and I'll do anything I can to help.
But you don't want to publicize.
I'm just not. It's out there. It's out there.
Anyway, thank you for the job that you're doing. Let me answer this question. Why does it take somebody who's in the private sector, because you're no longer a public servant, you're out of the Knesset, why does it take somebody in the private sector to help people at all? Wouldn't you think the government should have a ministry or some sort of help desk to help people navigate the system? Why is it up to private citizens to do?
Yeah, I don't have a simple answer. It's interesting how it all started, Zev. So when I got into the Knesset in 2013, all of a sudden my office became a hub of activity for English speakers who finally found their congressman in the Knesset. And we were busy. My staff worked very hard to help everyone who turned to us. When I left the Knesset, it continued. I'd say there were a handful a day of people who reached to me for help with things. I did my best to help. And then when Corona travel started about a year and a half ago, that 4 or 5 people a day all of a sudden became 20, 50, 100, and then hundreds. And then it just became the point that there had to be an organization to be able to deal with it, and with a staff and people getting paid. And we are reliant completely on private donors for the work that we do, and we're so thankful to people who are supporting our efforts.
You don't get any government funds?
No, there's no government funding, and
it makes sense that they should give funding to help people get into the country. If they're not doing it, shouldn't they fund somebody else?
Listen, it could be, as an example, I referenced Nefesh B'Nefesh before, who helps people get to Israel. They realize that they can do a much better job in helping people through the process of getting to Israel. And the government now views them as their official arm for Aliyah from North America. Sometimes someone who's outside the political system is able to get things done in a more efficient manner. And it comes to a lot of issues where that's the case. And certainly in our case, one of the things that we're trying to do is actually be an arm for all Olim to speak to the government about issues and try to change policy as well. So in that sense, I wouldn't ask the government for funding for that effort. But at the same time, I will say it's the greatest joy. When I was a member of Knesset, every meeting you have with a member of Knesset or minister, it's viewed in the framework of politics. What's the payoff? What's the this? What's the that? Coalition, opposition. When I go to the Knesset now, I'm a free agent. I'm just here representing Olim. I'm not representing any political party. There's no political games being played. It's purely help me to help Olim. And that I found to be a far more effective way of making change than it was even when I was within the system. So it's sort of liberating.
Would you classify yourself as a lobbyist?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't call a lobbyist, but I would call an advocate for Olim and their issues, because there really is no private interest here. This is an interest of the state of Israel that Olim should have a successful aliyah and be productive here and really thrive here. So I really view it as. And by the way, there's not one member of Knesset or minister who doesn't say, I don't want to help. They do want to help, and hopefully through the various committees that I've been able to speak at and the meetings that I'm having, hopefully these issues are being taken more seriously. And we do have a very long-term agenda in terms of policy changes way beyond just the Corona travel issue.
Now, you mentioned Nefesh B'Nefesh a few times, which help people make Aliyah from North America and other English-speaking countries. Do you work hand in hand with them too? Because they get people to Israel, and then you take over.
Well, yes and no. We're in constant communication with them. They have Aliyah advisors that every single Oleh has. They're available to help people with whatever they need. That's why I view us more in terms of the government relations side and the immediate policy changes that we're working on. But we're in regular touch with them. And by the way, with many other Aliyah organizations. We met yesterday with Telfed. That's for South African and Australian Aliyah. We have meetings set up with Oleh from Spanish speaking countries. There's a wonderful organization.
I love it. Oleh.
Ole, it's called Ole for Ole,
Oh,
yeah. And there's also Kalita for the French. And we view ourselves as we're going to have many affiliates and try to work together with every one of them to try to be as effective as possible. It's not an issue of one versus the other. It's everyone really focusing on what they can do best. And there's no doubt that Nefesh B'Nefesh has, I always tell people, I could not have made Aliyah without Nefesh B'Nefesh. And they do so much good to help so many people. And it's a pleasure to work in consonance with them on issues that come up.
Rabbi Dov Lipman, former member of Knesset, who's now head of Yad L'Olam, which helps people get to Israel, whether to stay. Well, you're helping to get them to stay for their tourist trips, but also once they're there as an Oleh, you help them navigate some of the bureaucracy and help them stay in the state of Israel. So thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, Zev. I really appreciate
keep
it.
helping people get into Israel because so many people want to go, which is nice to see. And I hear from so many people that I want to go and I can. So, but as we close out, do you see a time when even this is going to be easier? Because, this has been going on for over a year and a half, almost 2 years already.
For sure. So first of all, there's no greater joy than when people send us the pictures of them arriving in Israel and their reunions with their families and weddings that have taken place. It's really been incredible. Thousands of people that we've been able to touch and help. In terms of the timing, at the moment, if things continue the way they are COVID-wise, I think we will see things open up more and more. But we have to remember there's a worldwide pandemic and things can change, and it's a dynamic situation, and there might be steps forward and steps backward. And that's why, again, I'll emphasize it's so important to get the information. You can email us at info@yadlolim.org, and we will put you on the update list so you can understand everything that's happening in real time and make the right decisions for yourselves.
Former MK Rabbi Dov Lipman, thank you, and continued success.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Be well, everyone.